General Hospital spoiler reveal that Ava Jerome had walked through the echoing halls of Wyndemere countless times, but never had the castle felt so alive, so heavy with something unspoken, as it did the night she crossed paths with a shadow that should not have been there. Spoon Island had always carried a pulse of its own, haunted by Casadini secrets, memories of Nicola's, the weight of crimes never confessed and histories never buried. But on that night, it felt like the walls themselves were holding their breath. Ava sensed it before she saw anything. A shift in the air, a sound soft enough to be imagined, and then the flicker of movement at the end of the corridor. She had expected many things in that cursed home, but not a man alive and moving with the tension of someone used to being hunted. When he turned toward her, the dim light caught the sharp lines of his face, and the shock erupted inside her with the force of a physical blow. Valentin Casadini, disheveled, exhausted, but unmistakably present. His eyes held the haunted look of a man who had run out of places to hide, and yet beneath the ragged surface, Ava recognized something she had seen many times before: the iron edge of a Casadini, refusing to break. At first, Ava thought she was seeing a ghost, a projection from the castle's endless reservoir of trauma. But Valentin's breathing was too uneven, his stance too guarded, his presence too real. It took only seconds for Ava to realize that his appearance was not a coincidence. Someone like Valentin did not simply wander into danger. He was driven into it. Valentin didn't speak immediately. He stood in the dark with the quiet calculation of someone deciding whether to run, fight, or reveal the truth. Ava, equally frozen, found herself torn between every instinct she possessed: call the police, demand answers, protect herself, or simply let the moment unfold. Her mind raced. Valentin had vanished from Carlyle's attic. The police had combed Spoon Island only days earlier. Word of his disappearance had leaked into whispers, but nothing more. And now here he was, cornered in the one place he should have never returned to. When he finally spoke, it wasn't with excuses or justification. It was with a raw, frayed honesty that Ava had not heard from him in years. He had nowhere else to go. He didn't trust anyone. He was being hunted, and whoever was coming after him was willing to burn down anything in their path to get to him. Ava's breath caught. She knew enough about Valentin's past to understand that his enemies were not petty criminals or emotional ex-lovers. They were calculating, well-connected, and relentless. But the moment he mentioned being tracked, trapped, and forced into hiding, Ava felt a realization wash over her like cold water. Sidwell. The name didn't need to be spoken for her to feel its presence in the air. Sidwell had always been a man who moved beneath the surface, pulling strings, manipulating opportunities, shaping people into tools whether they realized it or not. His interest in Valentin had been subtle at first, then intense, and finally obsessive. Ava had seen enough in Sidwell's mannerisms to know he wasn't just fascinated by Valentin's reputation. He wanted to control it, own it, weaponize it. And now it was clear he had escalated to hunting him. If Sidwell was involved, Valentin's life wasn't merely in danger, it was being dismantled. The Casadini pride might have stopped Valentin from admitting it fully, but the fear flickering in his eyes was undeniable. Ava knew fear. She knew desperation. And she knew the difference between a man running from consequences and a man running from a predator. Valentin was the latter, and somehow, Ava understood immediately that she had just become part of his crisis, whether she wanted to or not. The adjustment began the moment Ava broke the silence and asked what he needed. She regretted the words instantly, because the look Valentin gave her made it clear he had been hoping she would ask. He didn't want her loyalty. He didn't want her protection. But he needed her secrecy. One phone call to the authorities would end everything for him, not just the chase, but the last pieces of freedom he was clinging to. Ava knew this. Valentin knew this. The castle seemed to know it too, its walls looming closer as though listening to their every word. When Valentin explained that the police's recent search of Spoon Island had left the property temporarily abandoned by law enforcement, Ava understood why he had returned. Wyndemere's labyrinth was a fortress of secrets. It had protected monsters for decades. Now it was protecting him. But in helping him, Ava crossed a line she could never step back from. Their unexpected alliance wasn't born from affection or trust, it was born from necessity, from survival, from a mutual understanding that they were standing inside the storm already, and turning away would not save either of them. Valentin disclosed more details and fragments, each one darker than the last. Someone had been tracking his movements for weeks. Someone had access to information only Casadini enemies could acquire. Someone had predicted every hiding place except this one. Ava listened in silence, piecing together something far worse than she expected. Sidwell wasn't after Valentin to destroy him. Sidwell wanted to claim him. The obsession Sidwell harbored was not that of a hunter but that of a man seeking to break and rebuild another in his own design. And Ava, with her history of being both victim and villain, recognized obsession when she saw it. This realization sparked the next adjustment. Ava did not ask Valentin to leave. She did not bargain with him. She did not threaten him. Instead, she allowed him deeper into the castle, not physically but emotionally, strategically. In doing so, she aligned herself with him in a way neither had anticipated. She had been drawn into Valentin's nightmare, and Valentin, sensing her shifting posture, began treating her not as a threat but as the only ally he had left. Their connection formed quickly, dangerously, and without hesitation. It was not romance. It was not nostalgia. It was a convergence of two people who understood the cost of survival better than most. Ava, hardened by loss and betrayal, and Valentin, cornered by a threat powerful enough to dismantle him, found themselves moving in sync as if drawn by instinct. And Sidwell, the man pulling the strings from afar, would feel the shift sooner than either of them realized. Sidwell's obsession with Valentin would intensify when Ava entered the equation. Ava was unpredictable, emotional, and razor-sharp when protecting what she cared about. To Sidwell, that made her a threat not because she could destroy him, but because she could influence Valentin in ways Sidwell could not. As Valentin hid within Wyndemere, and Ava became both his shield and his liability, Sidwell's fixation would transform from single-target pursuit to a dual obsession. Ava could feel already a prickle at the back of her neck, a sense that she had just stepped into the crosshairs of a man who viewed emotions as weaknesses to exploit. Valentin could feel it to the shift in the air, the tightening of the trap, the sense that Wyndemere was no longer merely a refuge but a battleground. Yet neither of them stepped back. The alliance had begun. The danger had already found its way through the castle's walls. And the truth Valentin carried, the truth Ava sensed, the truth Sidwell was willing to burn down everything to control, was the fuel that would push them both into a story far darker and more explosive than either of them had ever imagined. Because the moment Ava chose to let Valentin stay, the moment she refused to expose him, the moment she stood between him and the threat chasing him, an unspoken bond formed. A bond of survival, a bond of fear, a bond of shared danger. And that bond, unstable and electrifying, would not only reshape their connection, it would become the obsession Sidwell fixated on, the weapon he tried to exploit, and possibly the very thing that would destroy or save them both. As the secrets of Wyndemere continued to awaken around them, Ava never imagined that a single decision, a brief report about an intruder on Spoon Island, would spiral into one of the most dangerous turning points of her life. In her mind, calling Sidwell was nothing more than a practical, necessary step, a way to protect herself, safeguard Wyndemere, and maintain control over the chaos that had unexpectedly resurfaced inside those walls. But the moment Sidwell heard her words, everything about the atmosphere shifted. Ava had expected irritation, shock, perhaps even fear. What she did not expect was the expression that slowly spread across Sidwell's face, an expression so unnervingly delighted that it froze Ava in place. His eyes brightened, his posture lifted. A slow, controlled smile pulled at his mouth like a man being handed exactly what he'd been craving. It wasn't the face of a man who'd been warned about danger. It was the face of someone who had just received a gift. And in that moment, Ava understood she had made a terrible mistake. Sidwell wasn't horrified that someone had broken into the estate. He wasn't alarmed that a fugitive was hiding on Spoon Island. No. He was excited, thrilled, hungry. Ava's blood ran cold as she realized she hadn't just informed him about a threat. She had delivered him an opportunity, because Sidwell had wanted one thing for months, perhaps longer. He had been searching, tracking, studying fragments of information like a man pursuing a phantom. And now, thanks to Ava's report, the phantom had a name, a location, and a way back into Sidwell's reach. The intruder wasn't a stranger. It was Valentin. And Sidwell reacted as though he had been waiting for that name. Ava saw it instantly, the spark of obsession igniting in Sidwell's eyes. The kind of obsession that didn't appear overnight, but had been quietly cultivated for a long time. Sidwell didn't think of Valentin as a criminal to be caught or a danger to be neutralized. He thought of him as talent, as potential, as something he could use. Sidwell had been hoping to hire Valentin, hoping to harness his skills, hoping to mold him into a tool that fit perfectly into whatever complex and shadowed scheme he was building. And now, without having to lift a finger, Valentin had walked straight into his orbit. Ava tried to maintain her composure, but the truth she had just stumbled into was too large to ignore. Sidwell almost seemed grateful to her, grateful that she had revealed something he could exploit, grateful that she had unknowingly provided him with exactly what he'd been chasing. His reaction was so wildly different from what she expected that it shook her to the core. Instead of fear or urgency, he radiated satisfaction, as though Valentin's appearance wasn't a threat but a reward. And Ava realized, too late, that Sidwell was not a man who dealt with threats the way normal people did. He didn't fear power. He collected it. And Valentin was power. This was where the nightmare truly began. Valentin, who had already been running from unseen dangers, suddenly found himself plunged into a new level of entrapment. The threat he had been fleeing, whatever force had cornered him, whatever past enemy had risen again, was nothing compared to Sidwell's interest. Because Sidwell didn't want to destroy Valentin. He wanted to claim him, bend him, shape him, use him. Valentin wasn't a fugitive to Sidwell. He was a prize, a resource, a living weapon that could be pointed and fired at will. But Valentin was a Casadini, and turning a Casadini into a pawn was a task so dangerous. It bordered on suicidal. Ava could see the trap forming even before Valentin fully grasped it. She could already sense the tightening of the noose around him. The way Sidwell's mind was rapidly recalibrating, shifting strategies, preparing the psychological battlefield. Sidwell wasn't going to call the authorities. He wasn't going to report Valentin. He wasn't going to push him away. He was going to pull him closer. And Ava had inadvertently opened the door. The change happening inside the storyline was subtle but seismic. Valentin's situation was no longer simply about survival. It became a war of autonomy. Every move he made was now being watched, interpreted, anticipated by a man who had decided Valentin belonged to him. And Ava, who had initially just wanted to protect her home, found herself caught in the gravitational pull of these two dangerous forces. Valentin sensed it quickly. The world around him was shifting. The threats were multiplying. Sidwell's interest was far more suffocating than the law or any Casadini enemy. This was not a man chasing vengeance. This was a man chasing potential, and that made him unpredictable, uncontrollable, terrifying. Valentin's mind sharpened. His instincts tightened. The part of him that had once belonged wholly to his past resurfaced, the cold, calculating Casadini edge he had worked so hard to bury. Ava saw it in his eyes when she later confronted him. The fear, the fury, the growing claustrophobia of being hunted not only by the past, but by the present. Sidwell's obsession had become the catalyst for a transformation in Valentin. A transformation both powerful and unsettling. And Ava was now intricately woven into the center of it. Sidwell began to watch her too, analyzing her reactions, measuring her usefulness, calculating how she could fit into his plans. Ava felt at the moment their conversation ended. The way he looked at her as if she had become a piece of something much larger. As if she, like Valentin, could be moved, manipulated, or positioned. The realization terrified her. Because she had seen that look before, in men who destroyed entire lives without blinking. She had seen it in Nicholas. She had seen it in Victor. She had seen it in Helena. And now she was seeing it in Sidwell. The adjustment to the storyline escalated rapidly. Valentin became not only the hunted, but the desired. Ava became not only the witness, but the intermediary Sidwell intended to use. And Sidwell himself, once merely a background force, evolved into a full-blown obsession-driven architect of chaos, threading his influence through both of them with terrifying ease. Valentin's world constricted. Ava's world darkened. Sidwell's world expanded. The pressure built, rising to a breaking point. Valentin began operating like a man preparing for war, not the loud, explosive kind, but the quiet, psychological war that Casadinis were born to fight. He understood now that Sidwell wasn't going away. Sidwell wasn't slowing down. Sidwell wasn't going to accept no for an answer. And that realization forced Valentin into a transformation he hadn't wanted to make. He became more calculating, more ruthless, more dangerous. Because when a Casadini is pushed into a corner, they become someone the world should fear. And Sidwell, blinded by ambition, had no idea that by trying to control Valentin, he had awakened the most volatile version of him, the version who would not be bent or claimed, but would rather burn everything down than allow himself to be owned. Ava stood at the center of this unfolding chaos, the catalyst she never meant to be. Watching in horror as a simple truth she reported became the spark for a war of obsession, identity, and survival. And she knew that from this moment on, nothing would ever be simple again. Not for her. Not for Valentin. Not for Sidwell. Sidwell's promise to return Valentin to Wyndemere if he proved himself valuable was not a gesture of goodwill but the beginning of a negotiation twisted by obsession, manipulation, and calculated power. It was a declaration that Valentin was no longer just a fugitive, no longer just a Casadini hiding in the shadows of Spoon Island, but a commodity, a resource to be evaluated, controlled, and traded like an asset rather than a man. Sidwell did not offer freedom, he offered conditional captivity. And the terms of that captivity were vague enough to be dangerous, seductive enough to be disorienting, and strategic enough to pull Valentin deeper into a trap that had been disguised as opportunity. Ava watched the dynamic unfold with a mixture of dread and disbelief. realizing that she, inadvertently or not, had helped create the very chain that now threatened to bind Valentin's future. Sidwell's power was not loud or violent. It was subtle, psychological, tightening around Valentin like smoke, impossible to grasp, impossible to escape. Sidwell spoke of value, of potential, of mutual benefit. But underneath the polished words lay an obsession Ava recognized instantly. It was the same hunger she had once seen in people who wanted control over the Casadini name. The same glint she saw in eyes that viewed Valentin not as a person, but as a tool for building empires. And now Sidwell was dangling Wyndemere, Valentin's ancestral fortress, his sanctuary, his curse, as a reward for obedience. The more Sidwell talked, the more Ava sensed that the situation was spiraling in ways none of them had prepared for. Wyndemere was not simply a home, it was a symbol. It represented power, legacy, control, and fear. Returning Valentin there was not an act of kindness, but an act of territorial dominance. Sidwell was saying, without needing to say it aloud, that he had the authority to decide where Valentin belonged. And for a man like Valentin, whose entire life had been defined by desperately clawing for autonomy, that was more dangerous than any threat. The story began stretching and distorting as the three of them became tied together by necessity, secrets, and the growing intensity of Sidwell's fixation. Ava could feel the alliance mutating into something volatile. It had started as survival, then shifted into strategy, and now it was evolving into a labyrinth of psychological warfare. Sidwell appeared composed on the surface, but underneath was a storm of calculated desire. The desire to possess brilliance, to manipulate strength, to weaponize trauma. Valentin became the center of that storm. Sidwell didn't want to destroy him. He wanted to break him down and rebuild him. And Ava, watching all of this unfold around her, felt the castle walls closing, and even as she tried to maintain control, the situation had grown too large, too tangled, too dangerous. And yet she was already too deeply involved to step back. She had become woven into Sidwell's calculations and Valentin's survival, a thread that neither man intended to let unravel. Every decision Ava made, every word she spoke, every shift in her expression became part of a larger pattern. Sidwell interpreted for his own purposes. And the terrifying thing was that Sidwell believed he was being generous. In his mind, offering Wyndemere was almost benevolent, as if he were allowing Valentin to return to a throne, rather than placing him inside a gilded cage. Valentin, meanwhile, found himself torn between instinct and necessity. Part of him knew he should run from Sidwell's offer, should cut ties, should vanish into the shadows long before Sidwell could tighten his hold. But another part of him, the part shaped by years of Casadini conditioning, understood the value of playing along. Sidwell offered resources. Sidwell offered protection. Sidwell offered power wrapped in promises. And Valentin, cornered and uncertain, could not afford to ignore the opportunity. Yet beneath the surface, a new danger was forming. Because Sidwell's obsession was not just with Valentin's skills, it was with Valentin himself. It was with the idea of possessing something rare, brilliant, unpredictable. Sidwell spoke of partnership, but his eyes revealed something darker. He did not want an ally. He wanted ownership. He wanted influence. He wanted a Casadini he could control. And Ava, with her sharp instincts and haunted intuition, realized the alliance between the three of them was becoming something monstrous. What began as survival was turning into a triangular tension filled with manipulation, fear, and dangerous dependency. Sidwell controlled the resources. Valentin controlled the knowledge. Ava controlled the access. Together, they formed an alliance no one would trust, not even themselves. Yet the alliance held because it had to, because the stakes had grown too high to collapse. Because the dangers outside were nothing compared to the dangers from within. The longer they stayed connected, the more the madness seeped into each decision. Sidwell became increasingly bold, increasingly unhinged in how he spoke about Valentin's potential. Valentin grew more silent, more calculating, more reminiscent of the Casadini legacy he feared returning to. And Ava, trapped between them, felt the island itself changing, as if Wyndemere sensed the shifting power, and was awakening to feed on it. The danger was no longer abstract. It was alive. It was growing. It was tightening its grip on all three of them. The alliance between Ava, Sidwell, and Valentin wasn't just reckless. It was a fuse burning toward an explosion none of them could stop. And Sidwell's promise, that Valentin could reclaim Wyndemere only if he proved his worth, became the spark that set the entire storm into motion. Because Sidwell wasn't giving Valentin a home. He was giving him a throne built out of obsession. And once a man like Sidwell decides someone has value, the real danger begins. Valentin eliminating Carly is not just a plot twist. It is a kind of shock that ripples outward, poisoning alliances, warping loyalties, and dragging every character connected to her into a new psychological battlefield. The moment Valentin decides to remove Carly from his path, the story fractures into something darker, more obsessive, more volatile than anything Port Charles has seen in years. This choice does not come from impulse, it comes from pressure, from manipulation, from the tightening influence of Sidwell, and from Valentin's own unraveling sense of control. Carly, who once believed she was safely outside the Casadini storm, suddenly becomes the center of it. For Valentin, Carly becomes a liability, someone who knows too much, someone who sheltered him, someone who can expose everything he is trying to bury. The deeper he falls into Sidwell's grip, the more he convinces himself that eliminating Carly is not violence, but necessity. And once that thought takes root inside him, everything else collapses with frightening speed. He becomes colder, quieter, more focused. The Casadini edge inside him sharpens into a blade. Removing Carly becomes an equation, a strategy, a surgical strike designed not just to silence her but to sever his last tie to the part of himself that once cared. And Carly senses a shift long before she understands the danger. Valentin stops looking at her like an ally and starts looking at her like a loose thread he must cut. The air between them becomes sharper. The fear she feels is instinctive, primal, the realization that she is standing on the edge of something she cannot control. Carly has survived kidnappings, betrayals, mob wars, and tragedies, but she has never faced a version of Valentin who is being fed by Sidwell's obsession. But the most terrifying part is this: Carly's disappearance is only the beginning, because Brennan notices immediately. Brennan has been quietly watching every move, mapping every lie, deciphering every silence. He has the instincts of a soldier, and the intuition of a man who has survived too many shadows. When Carly suddenly drops out of the picture, when she stops calling, stops appearing, stops leaving traces, Brennan is the first to realize that something has gone terribly, dangerously wrong, and he begins to investigate. Brennan's investigation is not calm or methodical. It becomes personal, obsessive, consuming. Because Brennan saw the fear in Carly's eyes weeks before anyone else did. He saw the cracks forming around her, the tension whenever Valentin's name came up, the way Carly's instinctive confidence would flicker for just a second when she talked about him. Brennan understood what no one else did. Carly was on borrowed time. The moment she let Valentin hide in her attic. Now she is gone. And Brennan becomes obsessed, not with Carly's safety but with the truth. What happened? Why did Valentin vanish? Why did Carly stop talking? Why did Sidwell suddenly seem so eager to remain quiet? The more Brennan digs, the darker the answers become. He finds traces of Valentin's movements. He finds conflicting reports. He finds Sidwell's influence like fingerprints across every shadow. He finds Ava caught in the middle, trembling but silent. He finds hints, subtle, chilling hints, that Carly was not taken by force but removed with precision. The realization hits him like a blow. Valentin didn't just eliminate Carly. He erased her. That truth becomes Brennan's new obsession. And Brennan is not a man who lets go. His pursuit of the truth becomes a psychological war that pushes him toward Sidwell, toward Valentin, toward Ava, and toward the twisted alliance forming between them. Brennan senses the darkness growing like a living thing, shaping itself into something larger than any one person. Valentin's transformation, Sidwell's obsession, Ava's fear, all of it points to something catastrophic brewing beneath the surface. Carly's fate becomes the catalyst. Because if Valentin is willing to remove Carly, someone who once sheltered him, protected him, gave him safety, then he is no longer the man Port Charles once knew. He is becoming something else. Something shaped by Sidwell. Something sharpened by desperation. Something dangerous enough that even Brennan feels the hair on the back of his neck rise. The story shifts into madness from this point forward. Valentin, consumed by the act he cannot undo. Ava, trapped between loyalty and horror. Sidwell, thrilled by how easily Valentin crossed the line. Brennan, spiraling into obsession as he hunts for answers. And the most chilling part? Carly's disappearance is only the first sign of what Valentin is becoming. The Casadini darkness has awakened. Sidwell is feeding it. Ava is watching it. Brennan is chasing it. And Port Charles will soon learn that when Valentin eliminates one obstacle, he does not stop. He evolves.